Hey everybody, in this video we are going to be talking all about contracts and covenants. Karmic contracts, spiritual contracts, soul contracts, whether they are entered into in the present life or things that may be carried over from a past life or other existences, the spirit world, it does not matter. I have also been getting a pull back to discussing also a bit more of, say, things like spiritual balance, cosmic justice, and all of that. And this was a perfect subject to kind of dovetail between the two, but also expand into another topic of conversation. Because again, you know how I love to explore these things and really just kind of do these deep dive examinations. Karmic contracts and spiritual contracts and covenants and soul contracts and whatnot can be a very confusing and muddy territory because a lot of people, especially nowadays, often transfer a lot of their associating, what they've associated with how people enter into and work with contracts in this world, right? The physical world, the mundane world. They kind of transfer and project that onto the greater cosmic experience or the greater spiritual experience. But in truth, these contracts and agreements function very differently. And, you know, what we work with on Earth when we talk about contracts are really actually more about bindings and not necessarily contracts themselves. And, you know, even when it comes to paperwork, even when it comes to, you know, accords and business arrangements, you know, they're all bindings and scaffolding. It's structural. It's, you know, even marriages. And so it's not the same thing as a spiritual covenant or a soul covenant or soul contract or karmic contract or covenant. When we talk about spiritual contracts, and we'll just kind of label it that like that so I don't get into that bad habit I have of always constantly trying to rattle through every different variant there could be. When we talk about spiritual contracts, we are talking about energy forms or agreements that are inherently finite. They are not eternal. They are more like an itinerary for completion, for growth, for the soul, right? Because the imperative for all souls and the universe itself is to evolve into greater perfection and harmony. And contracts can facilitate that by providing experience opportunities, tasks, quests, jobs to be accomplished in order to further it environmentally and further it personally. This can also serve to balance what we might consider to be the scales of debts or disparity or discrepancies in the universe as well. And that, of course, is portioned out by the cosmos, I think that maybe that particular discussion is going to have to be looked at in another video sometime, because that, oh my God, if contracts can be misunderstood, debts can be exaggerated. So we'll come back to that another time. When it comes to spiritual contracts, you can place them in one of two categories. There are the contracts and the agreements that you have with yourself, your higher self, your Godhead, your Oversoul, and the universe, and maybe your guides, right? And then there are the contracts that you would make, agreements with other souls, other spirits, other beings, other people. And this can happen in past lives, and this can happen in present lives. It could be carried over from past lives. It can be just for one life. It doesn't matter. But those are the two categories that these contracts and covenants fall into. Regardless of what kind of contract or covenant one is agreeing to or entering into, again, it is still a finite thing. No contract or covenant in the world of spirit is eternal. And that is because when you evolve enough, right, when you come to a point of this higher level of consciousness, you don't need the structure of contracts to hold a harmonious, evolved existence. It's not necessary. But we have, of course, these energy forms, right? And that's basically all a contract or covenant is. It is an energy form. It is a thought form. It is, you could almost call it like an encodement that is there to, of course, precipitate a journey to accomplish itself. Some contracts are very specific and some contracts are very, very fluid. Some contracts are simply, okay, in this life or in this series of lives, my soul is working on evolving in its capacity to manifest, to use magic, or to love, or to govern responsibly and nurturingly and caringly. Or my soul is learning to do, to spot or identify X, Y, Z. Or perhaps it is about, again, fixing an imbalance is finite because this is about closing, right? We entered into this marriage to divorce our soul groups when we got divorced. That those kinds of things do happen. But in the end of the day, it's all about the accomplishing and the releasing of the lesson and that energy in order to grow and facilitate and, of course, then bring more harmony and balance to the cosmos. When it comes to contracts with other souls and other beings, whether this is with, again, people in past lives, past life agreements, past life arrangements, they're only allowed to happen if they do serve the purposes of the higher I guess you could say the higher consciousness working with all of those involved, right? So you would not be able to enter a spiritual agreement or a covenant or a contract or whatever with another person or another soul or another spirit unless that agreement served the purpose of, once it was accomplished, it would also help accomplish your own tasks in your own world, your own evolution. So let's talk about void contracts, because there are a lot of realities out there, a lot of experiences, connections, binding agreements, choices, limitations, whatever, a lot of struggles that only exist because people are either unconscious or maybe hiding or not letting themselves understand that certain contracts are truly void and null and are not going to get enforced. Now, the reason that might happen, there's numerous reasons why that might happen. Contracts, spiritual contracts and covenants, very much kind of like the contracts, on the mundane, when violated, become null and void. Especially if they are repeatedly violated. Especially if they are very clearly not serving the original purpose for the contract coming into being when it comes to the growth of all involved. And so an example of this would be, let's say Bill and James made a karmic agreement in a past life as cousins to clear a family curse. And so in this life, Bill and James incarnated as brothers with a karmic agreement to clear that family curse because it didn't happen in the last life, and so they incarnated into the same family, right? Maybe not directly, down this way and that, but you know where I'm going with that. Well, let's say in this life, Bill decides he's not interested in clearing the family curse. Bill decides that he's going to just piss off, from the agreement. And he decides that he is going to go his own way. Bill leaves town and decides that he's going to just move out, never come back, never bother with anyone again, or never bother to do anything about said family curse. Well, contract is void. The contract is violated at that point in time. There was an agreement, but the only reason there was agreement in the first place is that that contract was supposed to fulfill another agreement. So what other agreement could there have been, in Bill or in James's soul that would have facilitated this or said this is a good way to accomplish this? Well, it all depends. What if the agreement was breaking from tradition? Well, family curses tend to exist in families that are extremely, loyal to each other to a fault, even when they shouldn't be that loyal to what they hold on to. Bill breaking away from that loyalty is him breaking a cycle, funny enough. It's only for him, it's not clearing the family curse, but he found a way to learn his own lesson without actually fulfilling his contract. Or let's say James violates the contract another way. And James decides that loyalty and emulation is sacred in and of itself and becomes a carbon copy of their father and grandfather. And that keeps the curse going. The contract is void. The contract is violated. Nobody is bound to fulfill that contract that way anymore. Now, if it turns out that James is not learning his lesson, whatever his lesson is in that situation by making that choice, he will have to, of course, then incur new experiences that are brought to him until he learns his lesson. The contract is void. By making the choices they did, Bill and James both freed each other from the obligation to that contract, because the contract was just an opportunity to get some experience points anyway. That can get into a very complicated area, however, because a lot of contracts and covenants themselves can be ill-founded. Sometimes souls and spirits and people can often look at the contract or look at the agreement or the covenant as the prize. Contracts can be leveraged and maybe even created or bound. Let's say Joanne is on the hunt for a specific type of companion in love. Let's say Joanne has a past life or karmic attachment to a particular type of person from a particular type of soul group. And Joanne kind of goes out of her way to manipulate a relationship forth into being, whether it's a socially manipulative one or maybe magically manipulative, right? Getting into, psychic persuasion, mind control, energy work, the compelling types of love spells, whatever Joanne's got in her inventory, right? Some hypnotic persuasion or whatever. And this is a repeat of something that maybe Joanne has done in a past life, or something that Joanne's soul group, for instance, her whole Oversoul group, has a tendency to do. Find a target, go and get it, and then create a contract or a web of security, and kind of in that matrix of that reality she's created, she wants to clasp a mate. So you can see how I feel about mind-controlling love spells, by the way. We'll be talking about that in another video, but a little teaser. Joanne may actually leverage a past life contract or story with a member of another soul group that starts to play out at the same time, or the contract that Joanne creates starts to take on a life of its own. And the only way that would be allowed to come forth into being, if there was a soul lesson that Joanne was learning, and maybe a soul lesson that whatever mate she seizes is also there to learn as well. So what could those lessons be, right? Well, maybe Joanne is learning a lesson about not indenturing people to the reality that she or her family or her monad or her oversoul want to make serve them, or whatever needs that intention, that effort would serve for whatever reason. Perhaps the mate in the situation, right, the companion that is pulled into it, is learning a lesson about release, divorcing their soul groups from having any further interaction with each other. This may have been a vicious cycle for life and life and life. But if it's allowed to go on, it's also something that is about, again, facilitating the growth of all souls involved. And even if the contract is rendered void and violated, which it likely would be in situations like that, each individual still has the opportunity to learn and grow, but it may not necessarily be to the designs of the person trying to leverage, enforce, or push karma or contracts or covenants in order to hold their reality together. Again, a lot of people tend to project what they think contracts and covenants are all about when they're actually not. What if, Joanne ended up in a situation where they manufactured this sort of karmic story to play out, only to realize that the lesson was Joanne was supposed to learn the consequences of doing that. There's also a lot of karma that can come from taking over another person's reality or timeline with your manipulations. There could be a lesson there. And there could also be a lesson for the mate, however temporary that relationship or marriage would be, about breaking free and maybe living their life on their own terms, going their own way and accepting who they are, or again, on even a bigger level, ending a cyclical soul contract or relational or marital contract between soul groups that need to be divorced on a bigger level. That contract could be violated in all kinds of different ways. Obviously, the first violation, I think, would be kind of illuminated when we talk about things like marriage vows, right? Because one of the most common vows is I vow to cherish, right, in marriage. Well, there's nothing cherishing about manipulation and leveraging contracts and binding spells and mind control and anything along those lines. So right out the gate, the contract was void even before the vows were said, or certainly the millisecond after. You can see that in a lot of different situations, right? In business agreements, if a contract is voided or violated, then all bets are off. Well, the same thing can happen on the spiritual. This is that one area where they overlap a little bit. But you can always, again, be a little bit technical yourself. I'm one who believes that, the less contracts you need to get through life, the better off you are. But if somebody decides that they are going to present me with a contract, you better believe I am going over it with a fine-toothed comb. I know how to not only see the fine print, read the fine print, but I will scrutinize everything on that contract. I will scrutinize the hell out of it. Sometimes people just don't even want to do it with me anymore. Or we find a better way, or we finally come up with a contract that does make sense, that is fair, that does operate in the realm of equivalent exchange, and there is no room for exploitation or, let's just say, a bit of malicious, desperate binding for the security of the promise of litigation. And you need to be able to do that as well when it comes to all of your spiritual dealings too. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to, abandon maybe the nicer prospects of the contract. Maybe you liked the idea of the contract. Bill and James entering into a contract to clear a family curse is a beautiful intention, right? It not only creates a positive effect for them, but it creates a positive collateral effect for everyone around them. However, one could also argue that maybe Bill deciding to leave, take the apple as far away from the tree in the orchard as possible, is in a sense giving an opportunity to break a family curse by creating a whole new space for that family to exist down the road. That could also be the case. Some people enter, again, and like I said earlier, some people enter into contracts so that they can learn the lesson of when it's necessary and important and vital to break the contract. Again, I understand that this is all very lofty and romantic, especially when we think about, okay, well, why we might need contracts for the everyday when it comes to finances and business and politics and security and things like that. But again, it's a very different experience than when you're talking about the heart and spirit. A lot of the contracts entered into on the mundane are not intended to be fulfilled or ended. They are intended to hold in place. And sometimes there are spirits, and even spirits in human bodies, that want to do the same thing to you. So be very cautious when it comes to contracts. So you take care, and I will see you all again soon. This has just been a little chat, rapping about contracts for everybody. Let me know if you have any questions in the down bar below. It always fills me with joy when people ask questions to expand on the topic and dive even deeper, because, you know, this is one of the classroom areas of the spiritual community. Take care, and thank you so much for dropping by.